US President Donald Trump says a deal with Iran has been largely negotiated and the details will be announced soon. In a post online, Trump said he had a very good call with regional and Gulf leaders, including a separate call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said a memorandum of understanding pertaining to peace in capital letters was also discussed. He added the agreement also includes the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian state media say Tehran will continue managing the Strait of Hormuz. The Fars news agency says this information has been communicated with Washington. It also says Iran has agreed to allow the number of ships passing through the strait to go back to pre-war levels. But it says permission to pass does not mean the passage will be free. Well, for more on this, let's bring in our guest. Joining us here in the studio is Mohammed Al-Masri. He's a professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, and Alexandru Hudistanu, who's a military and diplomatic analyst. A warm welcome to both of you. Mohammed, if I can start with you, because Donald Trump says that things have been largely negotiated. Marco Rubio's just been speaking in India. He's talked about there being possibly good news in a matter of hours. Now, as you both know, I mean, this hasn't been officially released yet. A lot of this is coming through leaks or official briefings. But Rubio did talk about Iran lifting its control over the Strait of Hormuz, possibly in return for asset freezes being lifted, for Iran being able to sell its oil on the international markets. And we understand that the uranium enrichment sticking point may end up being discussed in some sort of post-war period. That's where we are at the moment. Mohammed, so are we then talking about a phased de-escalation and ceasefire? Is that essentially a stepped process here?
That's what it looks like, right? That we'd have a kind of ceasefire in place, and then we would move on to the more substantive negotiations surrounding the nuclear file, basically. And this is what we would have had, weeks ago when that ceasefire was signed. We would have had some version of this, but right after the ceasefire was agreed to, if you recall, Donald Trump then announced that blockade, the blockade against the Iranian blockade at Hormuz. And so, here we are. I do think that we have to be cautious. And as I mentioned in an earlier interview, you have voices, the pro-Iran war voices, the Iran hawks in Washington, taking to social media just over the past few hours, people like Ted Cruz and Mike Pompeo, Mark Levin, and a whole host of others. They're not happy with this agreement, as it's been reported so far. And there's no question that they are, on the phone with Washington insiders, with folks in the Trump administration, perhaps with Donald Trump himself, to try to convince him not to go forward. And so there is no deal until there is a deal.
No deal until there is a deal. Well, we can bring in Hamid Reza Gholamzadeh. He's in Tehran, the director of Diplo House, a think tank there in Tehran. So no deal until there's a deal. Most certainly, Marco Rubio said that he is cautious about saying that there is progress because until things are actually ratified and we see changes on the ground, anything could collapse potentially at the last minute. We're hearing from our correspondent in Tehran about there being accusations of obstruction on the American side. Where do you see things right now?
The reason that they are insisting on the word MoU instead of a deal is that they are not making a deal, actually. They are just agreeing to have more time to discuss the terms for a possible deal in the future. And the distances are still so far from each other. And the positions that they are taking, the issues that are point of difference between them is very huge that still I cannot see any deal in near future. What they are discussing right now is whether they can agree upon an MoU, which could be a framework for accepting these 30 to 60 days of negotiations in the future. With the terms that I'm being informed of based on my resources, I cannot say that it would be successful. I am even doubtful that the MoU would be signed between the two sides. But right now, all the both sides, and of course other players in the region, like the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, they are trying to help this procedure go on. So we cannot speak of any deal right now. It would be an MoU in order to continue the ceasefire and in order to continue the negotiations and to discuss all the differences that they already have.
Okay, turning to you, Alexandru. It sounds like potentially a time-buying exercise there, as we heard from Mohammad Reza. Obviously, a memorandum of understanding, an MoU, as Mohammad Reza has been calling it. I mean, it's not a legally binding thing, is it? It's not ratified in any international law. It's an agreement to basically have more talks. I wonder, though, at this stage, do we understand that memorandum of understanding may include a formal declaration, though, to end the war?
I think at this point, US, at least on the US side, they will not be willing to shut down the war, because that will just get this pressure lever off the hand of the US administration, and basically Iran will not necessarily have so much pressure on the negotiation to actually agree to terms that US would want. On the Iran side, for sure, they would like to hear that coming from the US administration. This war has been punishing, and the air campaigns have been damaging to the Iranian regime, and that pain has been felt. Furthermore, this blockade that US is doing, US can clearly shows that it can keep it for the long term, and it can be global. That means no Iranian ship or no ship that would help Iranian trade in any way will be safe at sea against this type of policing action that US is enforcing on the high seas. And US can do that, while Iran can literally not do nothing to stop it. There's no form of power projection that Iran can have in order to stop US from hunting down ships that are related to Iranian trade. So for sure, Iran would like to have that, but the US doesn't really look into that. I'm pretty sure the military pressure will still be there. I'm pretty sure the military track will still be open, but suspended in terms of action. And this blockade will be probably a tit for tat in terms of Strait of Hormuz opening. Then some easiness of the blockade will be done on the US side. We have to understand that this blockade is actually punishing. Looking at shippings reaching Asia, none of the shipping right now from Iranian ships that the US has enforced blockade on have reached ports of destination yet. So to that extent, the blockade is very well secured in as much as possible. And we know that right now we reach 100 ships that have been turned back, and 4 have been actually disabled while trying to run the blockade, basically.
Mohammed, any kind of arrangements under a huge amount of scrutiny in the United States as well. If the suggestion is that the United States would agree to unfreeze Iranian assets, that's not exactly going to go down well with the hawks back in Washington, is it?
No, and that's what these folks have been noting on social media. I mentioned a few of them. Lindsey Graham is another important voice, and he went so far as to say that if the U.S. signs this agreement, then the entire war will have been for naught. And so there is a sense in the United States that Iran has sort of, despite some of the damage that has been done to Iran, and there certainly has been extensive damage, but they've emerged perhaps with even more leverage than they had at the start of the war. Because while there is a lot of damage on Iran, Iran has also been able to project power. To borrow Alexander's phrase, right? There's been extensive damage to U.S. bases. There have been some interesting intelligence leaks just over the past 3 weeks in the United States. One of them says that 16 military bases have been extensively damaged here in the region, and most of them have been rendered completely unusable. That's to say nothing of all the other damage to Gulf assets and inside the state of Israel. So, both blockades have worked in the sense that they've punished the other side, and in the case of Iran, making this more of a horizontal affair. And so I think Donald Trump realized that this is not a good option for the United States, agreeing to this deal, but it's better, or let's say less bad, than the alternative, which would be more war and more destruction, which would be catastrophic for the U.S. and for the global economy and for Trump's allies.
Mohammad Reza, turning to you, I wonder if you can help us with something, because if this framework gives a gradual easing of sanctions. It gives Iran the right to sell its oil in international markets. That comes in return for lifting Iran's maritime blockade. But we are hearing from Iran about it still talking about, quote, management of the Strait, possibly with some sort of joint Omani-Iranian mechanism. I mean, strictly speaking, that's not opening the Strait, is it?
It depends on what you mean by opening the Strait. Iran still says that it has not closed the
when I say,
Strait.
Hamid Reza, when I say opening the Strait, I mean returning to the former status quo, where the international waterways were open, unfettered access to all maritime traffic.
In that case, Iran has clearly said that it would not be pre-war situations at all. That's the period. Iran would not accept at any terms that it could be without settlements, without the coordinations with the Iranian neighbor forces, and everything should be with its coordination. There would be some fees because of the services and the arrangements and the security and such issues. And Iran is considering the waters as its territorial waters, which gives Iran the right to rule over those areas and those waters. So with that, no, never would happen to be pre-war status quo. There is a new regime. But the point about the ease of the blockade that is in place, it could be discussed within the negotiations. There are other ways as well for the Iranian to have the option to try to militarily open the blockade and break it. Actually, that is one option that could be on the table for Iranian side. But the Americans do not have that similar option against the Strait of Hormuz because they have tried the military option against Iran. It did not work. I understand the positions that the two distinguished guests referred to about the oppositions in the American political sphere. But the point is that hawkish people like Ted Cruz or Lindsey Graham and these people, at the end of the day, they are Republican figures, and we know that the party stands behind the President Trump and they support him. The results in the Kentucky shows that the party is fully supporting the President Trump, and even if they accept these terms, free some blocked free frozen assets, they would support President Trump. They would find some wording for that.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, they would support President Trump and whatever he decides.
Understood. Alexandru, if I could end with you, because let's say, Alexandru, that commercial shipping is meant to resume next week. I mean, how do international shipping companies trust this text? You know, I mean, without a massive permanent either US naval presence there or at least some other allied naval presence there to make sure that commercial interests are protected. That is not Western forces backing away from the region, is it?
So first, let's set up a baseline. Shipping will happen wherever there's a chance for shipping to happen, but that doesn't mean that companies will ever trust Iran again. And the argument of Iran considering these waters as territorial waters, this kind of infringes on the idea that the other side of the strait is actually territorial waters of Oman and UAE. Plus, to the extent it is allowed contiguous zone once you are towards the exit. So, having this attitude, the Iranian leadership showing, and RGC Navy, especially in RGC, showing this attitude that the Strait of Hormuz is their own waters now will probably be contended by any way and means by the international community. We see already European Union extending their framework of sanctions to include freedom of navigation infringements in the Strait of Hormuz. That will happen more and more by the international community. The more Iran will try to enforce some form of control, which is unilaterally recognized. Most likely the region will not be happy with that. Most likely the shipping companies will not be happy with that, and that will increase premiums, and that will increase rates for container, and that will increase rates for anything related to that. That being said, shipping will happen the moment there is a chance for that to happen. Right. But the understanding of this strait to be under fully Iranian control, I think that will not fall well with anybody in the international system, and this will be contended over and over again. And I've always claimed that once ceasefire condition acceptable for the international community will be in place, we will see this type of freedom of navigation shipping through the Omani water, and I would be interested to see what Iran will have to say about that, and if they will be willing to be hawkish and to lash out at the region indiscriminately just because.
Right, there are so many unknowables right now. Hopefully we should have some clarity in the coming hours, at least that's according to Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State. In the meantime, many thanks for your input, all three of you. Mohammed El-Masri, Professor of Media Studies at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies, Alexandru Huidistanu, military and diplomatic analyst, maritime security expert, and Hamid Reza Gholemstani, the Director of Diplo House, a think tank in Tehran. Thank you so much.